Welcome back. This is Duo Haptism from the 16-Bit Couple coming to you with our third episode of Indie Showcase with Sam Ruggieri. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
All right. And we will be talking about your game Outer Colony. All right. And Sam, we actually first met you at Too Many Games just a couple months ago now, has it been?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Great convention. I met a whole bunch of very cool people there, and I think some of the best parts of it was just being able to network with streamers and content creators like you guys.
Yeah, we definitely were impressed with what we saw of the game there. I started following you on Twitter, getting all your updates on your Twitter account, which you do a lot of updates and are really open from what I've seen, and really showing what you're doing with the game.
I've tried really hard from the very beginning of my foray into game development to be as transparent as possible, just because there's so little transparency that you get out of development of AAA titles, especially that, I found myself as a consumer really frustrated. And so it's kind of been an interesting experiment in that there are a lot of pros and cons to being very transparent, because sometimes when you post a ton of content like I do, when you try to explain things in depth like I do, it invites a lot of questions and criticism that you might not otherwise get.
Yeah.
So, to an extent, from a business perspective, I sort of understand why the bigger outfits keep things behind closed doors as much as they do. But from where I sit, it's just I wouldn't want to operate like that. I like to be as straightforward and engage people who are interested enough to follow me to the greatest extent possible.
Yeah, and it is really interesting watching everything you do. It's I've seen just from our time at Too Many Games to what we're seeing now on your Twitter account, how much the game has actually changed and evolved.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's really interesting. The other thing that was great about Too Many Games was that it was an opportunity to get Outer Colony in front of real people in a different way than I ever could before. Because it's one thing to post on Twitter, it's one thing to post online entries in the blog and have people read it and get email exchanges with them, and it's something else to sit down with somebody who's never seen it before, have to give them a 30-second pitch, and then watch their immediate reactions to the game. One of my biggest takeaways from Too Many Games was that I've gone really far in building a deep, comprehensive world model. There's all sorts of neat stuff going on that's sort of on the periphery of the player, but maybe there wasn't quite enough gameplay that
Mm-hmm.
directly engaged the player as you're building up your colony. And so that was one of my biggest takeaways from Too Many Games, and I spent the last couple weeks after that pushing really hard to build in a lot more events that directly engage the player, that directly challenge the colony's progress,
Yeah.
and it just makes a slightly more interactive experience. And I've been pushing real hard to get all that stuff in before I cut the public demo.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's just the stuff I've seen. I mean, and me and Ryoko were talking about this the other day. It's just the depth of the game. I mean, we were just blown away by how much thought you put into a lot of these things, and just the models you use, and just the artificial intelligence of it.
Thank you. So much of what makes Outer Colony what it is really that attention to detail.
Yeah.
We've pushed as hard as possible to build a really comprehensive world model. It's low fidelity, but it encompasses a huge variety of subsystems to try to build a world that's as much like the real world as possible from a hard number-driven simulation
Yeah.
sort of perspective. And so the interesting thing about a lot of Outer Colony's gameplay is that it's not really like traditional gameplay that you'll get out of a lot of other games, in that those are built off rule sets that are
Yeah.
created for the purpose of,
For
hey,
the
here's
game.
a combat system, here are special moves, it does this much damage to a health bar. A lot of the gameplay, quote unquote, in Outer Colony is really organic, and they're just emergent effects of
Yes.
underlying subsystems. So it makes for a different kind of experience. It's a little bit more challenging sometimes to to get that traditional gameplay from a game design perspective. But the strength of it is that it creates a really unique experience that's just, I think, different from just about anything else that exists that you can play right now.
I definitely can see that. I mean, it's definitely a thinker game. It's one that's going to really challenge a lot of players' mentalities and just thinking outside of the box a lot of times.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, again, it's a strength, and at the same time it's a slight cause for concern in that I know from where I sit that Outer Colony is not going to be the kind of game that necessarily everybody will be able to get into and enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
It probably has a fairly narrow appeal. And just to draw a comparison that I can contrast from, like David Stanley's Skelettack,
Yeah.
he just cut an awesome demo for that game, and that's like the first single player game that I have played all the way through in like a decade. But it's just a fantastic, fun game
Oh,
that you can
definitely.
pick up. You don't need 2 hours to play it. You could just dive right in. There's nothing that you have to. The learning curve is shallow. The challenge is just right, and it's real easy for anybody to pick up and play.
Yes.
Um, Outer Colony does not fall into that category. So in that to really experience the game, it takes a lot of time. You have to invest a lot of energy into figuring out how things work. I think the
Mm-hmm.
payoff is worth it. For me, I think the experience is great, but there is a bit of a steep learning curve. Now, one of the things that I've worked really hard on is trying to make the mechanics of playing Outer Colony as simple and intuitive as possible. So a game that a lot of people were comparing it to at Too Many Games is something called Dwarf Fortress. Are you
Yes.
familiar with that title?
Actually, one of the questions we got from a viewer, just by the username Curious Guy, actually asked the question for those of us that, newer to the simulation genre. Can you explain some of the differences slash comparisons between Dwarf Fortress and Outer Colony?
Wow, what an apropos question. This fits perfectly with what I was just going to get into. Um, One of the things about Dwarf Fortress, and I have not played, I'm almost embarrassed to admit, I have not really played all that much Dwarf Fortress. It is a spectacular game, and
Mm-hmm.
I can't say enough good things about it based off what I've read. One of the biggest difficulties of Dwarf Fortress is that playing it is so difficult,
Yeah.
which is to say that you can't just like click on buttons visually and drag things. It's like everything is key commands for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
The mechanics of actually playing it are like, okay, now I need to hit like E and then
Okay.
7 and then like R, and then that brings up the stockpile menu, and it's a very difficult thing to get into, and that's by design.
Yeah.
If you read what the developer's written, that's not a knock um,
Against it.
against the Adams brothers who are responsible for it. It's just something that precludes a lot of people from playing Dwarf Fortress. Outer Colony is built so that it plays more from a mechanics of clicking around perspective. It's much more
Mm-hmm.
like a regular RTS in that
Yeah.
you've got buttons that are to issue certain commands. Everything is just about clicking in the world. We've got a tile set that makes everything hopefully visually pleasing and very intuitive. So there's one of the biggest differences from a playability perspective is that I think Outer Colony is just a slightly more intuitive experience that's a little bit easier to pick up.
Okay.
Um, so that's one of the big differences. I'd say the other things are that um, Outer Colony is fundamentally multi-threaded. I know Dwarf Fortress is a single-threaded
Yeah.
game. That's how its engine works. I've
Mm-hmm.
built Outer Colony from the ground up to try to squeeze as much horsepower as possible out of consumer hardware
Yeah.
in order to support a lot of the stuff that I'm doing. I have the benefit of writing Outer Colony in Java. I'm not sure what Dwarf Fortress is written in, but
Mm-hmm.
um, Outer Colony started being written long after Dwarf Fortress started, so I
Yeah.
think I can take advantage of a lot more modern programming technology than Zach and Tarn had at their disposal when they started.
Definitely.
And the other really big difference that I'll note is that um, what Outer Colony really is for me is that I had I've been working for about a decade as a software engineer,
Mm-hmm.
and I cut my teeth working in defense on projects that were DARPA funded, that were all about comprehensive, high fidelity world simulations,
Mm-hmm.
and then building AI entities to do things in those simulations in order to train soldiers, DoD personnel,
Yeah.
other sorts of professionals. They call those serious games.
Yes.
Um, I was great experience that I got, but I found that without a PhD, I couldn't really implement my ideas as I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to in that sort of environment. So, when you're sitting there as a software engineer, you are implementing other people's ideas,
Yeah.
and your options are go back to grad school for 5 years, get a PhD. Maybe if you know the right people, you can get funding,
Yeah.
or save up money and try to implement your own ideas on your own.
Yeah.
And so I kind of went out and I found that games were a good fit for what I wanted to do. Um, and what Outer Colony really is it's my views on simulation and human behavior modeling realized in software. So it's a little bit of a passion project from my side. I won't get too far into the deeper parts of how I approach human behavior modeling,
Mm-hmm.
how I approach simulation. That stuff's all on my website. We
Yeah.
could spend 3 hours talking about that stuff, and maybe someday we can. But
Yeah.
just to wrap up this question, um, that's kind of what Outer Colony is, and maybe how it's a little bit
Different.
different from
Yeah.
Dwarf Fortress.
Yeah, and you also covered what my next question was going to be, like the story behind how you got into actually starting the game Outer Colony. So you covered one of my questions before I asked it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, definitely interested in this. We've definitely been looking over your website, and it's a lot of really really in depth stuff in there. I'm definitely going to have it linked below. People can look at your website and learn a lot.
I really can't wait to cut the demo because I think, the website gets into it in an
Mm-hmm.
abstract kind of way. But once you can play it and see how the tutorials on the website are firsthand, I think it all comes together in a way that is both very fun and I think really interesting.
It definitely does look like it. Speaking of a demo, do you have certain platforms you plan on releasing it for, or is it just you're going to release the Java jar file and let it be whatever people want to run it on?
So this is the way that I think I'm going to go about this right now is I have cut little releases to friends internally where I've
Mm-hmm.
tried to hand them a jar file and say, go ahead and play it. And even for some of my friends who are fairly tech savvy, just giving them a jar and saying run it is beyond what a lot
Yeah.
of regular people can do. They'll be like, "Oh, I don't have Java. What's this? What's that?" and the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I've spent a bunch of time putting together an installer that will load Java for you, put the right version where it's got to be. It's just a
Awesome.
no-brainer. So I've tried to, like I say, everything is about setting the bar as low as possible in
Mm-hmm.
terms of complexity to make it available to as many people as I can. So right now I've got an installer that works for Windows. The only thing that's preventing me from cutting Mac and Linux releases is
Mm-hmm.
really just testing.
Okay.
I don't have a Mac that I could test on, and I don't really have the time to like test everything on Linux too.
Yeah.
So
Understandable.
the demo release will probably be Windows only. Um, Again, just because of the constraints that I'm under to make it
Yeah,
happen.
your
But
current limitations.
yeah, exactly. If I had a shop with 5 or 6 other software engineers here, it'd be no problem.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think in the long run, once we go to cut the 1.0 release, and I don't want to make any promises right now, but I think we should be able to support Mac and Linux for the
Awesome.
full release too.
Definitely awesome to hear that. Most of our stuff we do produce on Mac, even our Let's Plays. So we really like to hear more game support of the Mac OS. But that's definitely understandable doing the Windows version first. We understand that totally.
And that's a great thing about Java is that, and technically, it should run the same on
Oh,
Linux and Mac, but
mm-hmm.
I know enough that it doesn't always play out like that,
No, it
and
does not.
you need to test it anyway. But
Yeah,
it should be pretty portable.
very cool. All right, let's go to our viewer slash listeners submitted questions. The first is actually from our episode one guest, David Stanley, and this is some topics we've already covered, but he goes, "Your AI is very impressive. Was this the foundation that Outer Colony was built around, or did it come later in development?"
That's a really interesting question. Um, as far as it being the foundation, it's the foundation of Outer Colony's design, which
Mm-hmm.
is to say that when I set out to make Outer Colony, I wanted to realize these specific ideas that I had about human behavior modeling. Um, Everything relating to the plan generator, which is something you can read about on our website.
Mm-hmm.
The core of that stuff was really the fundamental basis of the design. I didn't want the AI to be scripted at all. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want it to run off finite state machines. The way that it all works is that entities put together plans dynamically. They
Okay.
have a state that they want to achieve in the world, and they know this universe of actions that they can undertake to achieve various states. So they basically chain together series of actions that'll lead to the state they want to be, and then just like you might make a pros and cons chart in real life to
Yeah.
compare various things you could do, they pretty much do the same thing under the covers to dynamically figure out how they want to accomplish stuff. So we've taken a bit of a different approach to AI than what I've seen, at least in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
serious games, in that we've moved away from classical models like finite state machines. We're
Machines.
really
Yeah.
trying to do something new. The human behavior modeling, too, is um, I've worked on projects that have focused on specific aspects of human behavior modeling.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Here's something, a neat project on social networks and how it affects things,
Mm-hmm.
and doing things like that. One piece like a personality model and building that out. Doing individual pieces in a vacuum can yield interesting results. But
Yeah.
what I really want to do with Outer Colony was to model a whole bunch of these different discrete subsystems, like the NPCs in Outer Colony have personalities. They
Mm-hmm.
remember almost everything that happens to them, and they figure stuff out based on that. They
Okay.
all have cultures. They have social networks that affect their behavior, and all of these discrete subsystems come together, and those all feed into how they pick out the states they want to achieve and how they weigh those pros and cons and the actions they want to take. And so the goal there is to build behaviors that are more interesting and a bit more like real people. Because real people, we account for all these different things. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like I just have a social network. I've got a personality, I've got a
Yes.
social network, I've got experiences, and all that stuff feeds into it. So that was the core of what I wanted to accomplish with Outer Colony. But from an actual building out the software
Mm-hmm.
perspective, that's like the highest level stuff. The simulation environment is what the real core base of the game is.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of believe that any AI is only going to be as strong as the sort of simulation and that as the environment that it operates in. Without a really comprehensive simulation, the AI is not going to be able to do interesting things. Like if you think about a traditional game world,
Yeah.
what can you do in Call of Duty or a first-person shooter? Maybe you could knock things over, you can shoot stuff, and you can kill people, but that's it. The
You
kind of
can't really
AI
go
that
in depth.
yeah, exactly. The kind of AI that I have wouldn't be able to do anything interesting in that sort of world because the world can't be changed in any appreciable way. There
Yes.
aren't that many states it can be in. So the reason that we've built out the Outer Colony worlds to have, temperature, weather, to have it be built out of these volumetric spaces that can be manipulated in a huge
Mm-hmm.
variety of ways, fire, liquid physics, all these different things that can be changed, is to give the AI a playground in which it can do really interesting and neat things. So I hope that sort of answers the question about what the core of the software is and the core of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's definitely impressive. Just going over, like I said, looking at your website and how you really go in depth in some of these uh, models and how decisions are actually made by the characters inside the game.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words.
All right, the next two questions are actually both from Beautiful Panda. The
He's a
first
great
one
guy.
is, how detailed is the production of goods in your game? Is there a base level of farming slash cooking implemented, or are we going to see more advanced stuff that includes products from several production chains to create one or more advanced product?
Okay, that is another really good question. Outer Colony's got a manufacturing system right now,
Okay.
which is basically how you translate raw materials into finished goods.
Okay.
One thing to keep in mind about Outer Colony is that every single thing in the game is made up of materials.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're talking about a human NPC that has an arm that's made up of some volume of flesh and skin and bone,
Mm-hmm.
or you're talking about a rifle that's got a barrel that's made of metal, a magazine that's made of plastic, a
Mm-hmm.
stock that's made out of wood. Everything is made up of raw materials.
Okay.
And those raw materials all have a variety of properties that basically impart certain statistics and properties onto the items that they comprise. What the manufacturing system is all about, we do have cooking, brewing, all sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Weapons manufacturing, structure component building. I think there are, I want to say it's about a dozen different manufacturing professions.
Okay.
But as far as supply chains are concerned, um, you don't really have to build like all of the subcomponents
Mm-hmm.
for an item that you're building are built at manufacturing time.
Okay.
So it's not like you build rifle barrels and then you build stocks and then
Okay.
you build magazines. I actually toyed with that idea. I found it to be immensely, like, impossibly tedious. It was
Yeah,
just
I could see
it
how
was
that could be.
it was like agonizing. Some of the stuff that I do is really try to make the gameplay as smooth as possible. So I've simplified it so that you build, when you go to manufacture something, you say, I want to build this kind of rifle.
Mm-hmm.
I want to use this sort of metal for the barrel. I want to use this sort of solid for the stock. And you specify all the components, and then you just leave the building of the components and assembly of the components is just left to the NPCs.
Okay.
So under the covers, yes, there are components that are all getting built, but to just remove some of the agony of the process and make the game simpler and more playable,
Yeah.
the NPCs handle all the assembly. I've got a page on my website that's all about manufacturing,
Okay.
and I'll post that in my Twitter feed to make sure people can see it. But it's got a tutorial that walks them through
Okay.
all this stuff.
I will definitely have your Twitter handle down below and a link to your website because
Many
that's
thanks.
just a lot of really great information. All right, Beautiful Panda's second question is I've looked at your game quite a lot the last few days and couldn't figure out one thing. Will this game have rebindable keys?
That is a really good question again, and I have a feeling probably not for the demo, just
Okay.
because I'm pushing as hard as possible to get the demo out. Um, One of the real challenges with cutting a demo, and rebindable keys is something that's on my to-do list,
Okay.
is that there's an almost infinite universe of things that I want
Mm-hmm.
to put in the game. Like every day that I'm playtesting, I'll hit something where it's like, oh man, if only I had some way to specify, I'd want to make prison guards
Mm-hmm.
enforce different rules on different prisoners instead of just having one rule set for all the prisoners.
Yeah.
Like there's stuff like that that constantly comes up. The toughest thing for me right now is that I've had to just draw a line in the sand and say, okay, I've got enough features.
Yes.
I got to cut a release. I've got to get this out. I've got to not keep adding. I can't let the scope creep get too wide.
Yeah.
So rebindable keys are on my to-do list. Probably not going to happen for the demo,
Okay.
but it's something that I'll bear in mind. And a lot of it too is once I cut the public release, I'm going to get a lot of feedback, I hope,
Oh,
from
definitely.
what people want. And that will help me to prioritize which features I want to focus on the most.
Yeah. Definitely the demos tend to get a lot of feedback. I know in episode 1, whenever we talked to David before to actually launch his demo, I've been talking to him back and forth for a little bit, and he's just saying he gets a ton of input from demos. So I'm definitely sure you'll see that.
I'm sure. And he set the bar very, very high in what a demo can be, especially among. There's a certain group of us on Twitter, indie devs, streamers. There's a bunch of different people who are involved in this stuff that follow each other, and I want my demo to be at that level of polish where it's real smooth, real playable, real minimal in terms of bugs. He set the bar very high in that regard, and I kind of want to work to do as good a job as he did.
I'm sure it'll turn out really great. I know you were saying about the the scope and just how it's ever expanding. That was one thing whenever me and Ryoko were actually looking through your website. She actually just goes, "When's his end game? Like, when is his end point?" Because she was seeing that you were adding a lot of different
Oh,
features.
and yeah, and that's one of the toughest things is that like I've been putting out maybe an article every few weeks on the
Mm-hmm.
website recently. I have got 2 dozen more tutorials that I have to write for the website. I've coded so much stuff this summer that
Mm-hmm.
has to go in. Bounty hunters will show up. There's a whole way to interact with the Bounty Hunters Guild. Um, Different sub factions. There's a group of indigenous people called like the Quarthanid, and they're all about like bee shamanism and making, natural narcotics and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. There's the Iron Gear that are making omnicidal robots. There's all these different new gameplay features that I haven't even gotten to add to the website yet. And as far as when the end game is concerned, when I hit that point, I had a document that I decided on these are the features I need to get in for
Mm-hmm.
version 1.0. I hit that point. We are feature complete right now. As far as the
Okay.
gameplay additions that I was doing this summer were concerned, that was a little more difficult because one of the things with games is that it's almost like it's ready when it feels right.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's a horror show. That's a horror show approach from a project management standpoint. You never
Yeah.
want your functional spec to be it's ready when it feels right. But from the gameplay additions perspective, that kind of is what it is. I think I'm
Yeah.
there. I've drawn that line in the sand where it's like every day, everybody that I know that I'm working with on this has, oh man, can we put in this? Can we put in that? And at this point, I have to say, like, no, we can't
Yeah.
put it in. We're going to cut the demo. We'll put it in afterwards. That's what the 1.0 release is for. So
Okay.
that's what I'm trying to do as far as what the end game is right now.
All right. And we have one last viewer slash listener submitted question from username MacRib.
Oh
And
God,
take it this is someone you know.
yes.
All right. The question is, Sam, please speak to us about the creatures of Outer Colony. In particular, the Karnorak. Do you prefer it to
Oh,
the Ranstud? Or I don't know how you pronounce
oh.
that.
All right. So this is a question from. I actually get a bunch of help working on this project from various people I know.
Okay.
Um, there are a whole bunch of other members on this team aside from me.
Okay.
The only thing I can really do is software engineering, so I write code and do the designs. But all the art, all the music is getting made by a bunch of other people.
Okay.
Um, One of the guys who helps me out a lot is the illustrious John Richard Hayes. He's a grad student working towards his PhD in biology,
Okay.
and he helps me come up with a lot of lore for the game. He's helped me invent features for some of the minor factions, and he's done a lot of work using some of his biology background to help me
Okay.
come up with weird and interesting creature species.
Okay.
Um, the Karnarok is a bizarre creature that's reproductive life cycle involves exploding and releasing lots of other baby Karnaroks
Okay.
at the end of its pregnancy. The Ranstot is a weird creature that is basically biologically immortal, and it will
Okay.
just keep growing and growing the more that it eats. As for
Okay.
which one I like better, they are both disgusting and vile creations from a deranged and perverse mind. I'll probably say the Randstot just because
Okay.
it was much easier to code.
Oh, I'm
But
sure.
there's a lot of this is one of the neat things about Outer Colony is that there's all kind of neat stuff going on in the periphery of these worlds, like
Mm-hmm.
creature life cycles. And if you're paying attention to the creatures that inhabit your biome, you'll see them doing all this neat and interesting stuff on the periphery. And I think
Okay.
it just goes a long way to making the worlds feel more realistic, feel more immersive, feel more like a real place. But I have to give a lot of credit to uh, John for all the work that he's done in helping me come up with neat ideas for Outer Colony.
All right. Well, that definitely sounds like a actually more reason to play the game because that just sounds really cool.
Thank you.
All right. And actually, this episode's winner of the Crunchyroll Guest Pass giveaway is actually MacRib.
Oh, hooray! That's outstanding.
All right. Well, that's pretty much all the questions I have for you today. Do you have any final words you'd like to share?
Hey, I just want to thank you guys so much for having me on. I have enjoyed the heck out of your Zelda playthroughs. Those are a great watch when I'm here programming by myself. I'm at home all day without
Mm-hmm.
like any human contact. So to try to prevent myself from becoming a weird hermit, I watch them all the time on my second monitor just to have a voice and watch some neat games getting played. So um, keep up the great stuff with your let's plays, with your playthroughs rather.
Yeah. We definitely do enjoy them. I know you also really enjoyed the Psychonauts episodes whenever they were
Oh,
being released.
Psychonauts was so. I've never played that game before. I barely knew what it was. That was so weird. I got to catch up with more of your content. You guys are prolific producers, and I'm falling behind, but
We
it's really
definitely
good
try.
stuff. Oh,
But
it's
yeah.
fun. It's real fun.
All right. Well, it was great talking with you, Sam. I'm Duo Haptism of the 16-bit couple. This has been Indie Showcase, episode 3 with Sam and his game Outer Colony. Sam, have a great day.
Thanks again. Take care.
Bye.